Literary houses are like the Disneyland of literature.
I get the attraction of writers' houses. It's the thing you do when you're extraordinarily bored. Has that been your experience, though, in going to writers' houses? Like, do you have the
you know what? My experience is like, God, some of these writers rich.
This is Dead Writers, a show about great American authors and where they lived.
I'm Tess Wilson.
And I'm Brock Clark.
A decade ago, I became obsessed with saving Harriet Beecher Stowe's house in Maine. Then I did save it, but I'm still obsessed with literary houses, and not just Stowe's.
I wrote a novel called An Arsonist's Guide to Writers' Homes in New England because I couldn't figure out why anyone goes to writers' homes, let alone tries to save them.
You'd think I'd hate Brock.
But you're my colleague. You can't hate me.
It's true. That would be awkward.
So instead of hating each other, we made this show.
Brock, I'll make sure I don't. What does this say? For Auntie Ken, a smiling me, Vincent. See, she signed her name Vincent.
Huh.
That's what she really went by.
That's interesting.
There's a corner cabinet at the Whitehall Inn in Camden, Maine, devoted to Edna St. Vincent Millay. There are clipped-out articles, high school diplomas, and framed photos of Millay. Or at least, that's what we think they are.
Are we sure that's her? I mean, I know that's her, but that's her. Yeah. Huh. Wait, who's it signed to?
Auntie.
How's your eye? How are your eyes?
It says, for Auntie Ken. Or Kim. For Auntie Kim.
And what's in quotation marks there?
A smiling me.
I like it's barely a smiling her.
She doesn't smile very often.
No, like a skeptical me.
Pictures.
Oh, yeah, right. We'll give you the scoop. I'm going to read it. The Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, who is Vincent? Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Edna St. Vincent Millay was discovered at Whitehall in 1912, right here in this room. Yeah, I like that. We'll give you the scoop. So, you can't see here.
We're here to take in the scene, to get a feel for where it all started for Edna St. Vincent Millay, who won the Pulitzer in 1923 for her volume of verse called The Ballad of the Harp Weaver, A Few Figs from Thistles, 8 Sonnets in American Poetry. She published this collection the same year T.S. Eliot published his landmark modernist poem, The Wasteland. I'm not just saying that Millay was on par with Eliot. I'm saying that we should be reading her poetry the same way we read Eliot, as one of the greatest poets of the 20th century. And here we are in Camden, Maine, where her career began. We're at the Whitehall on High Street in Camden. It's a beautiful old inn. The room is grand, but empty when we visit in March before the summer season begins. The inn opened just for us. It's freezing inside and the fire alarm batteries are chirping, but you still get a sense for how festive it can be. Peering through the window is a little glimpse of the bay.
All I could see from where I stood was 3 long mountains and a wood. I turned and looked another way and saw 3 islands in a bay.
That's Millay reading from Renaissance, a poem she read one evening at a talent show at the Whitehall Inn in 1912. We're told she read it in front of the grand piano that still stands in the corner. She was just 20 then, but had already been a published poet since she was 15 when her writing was included in St. Nicholas magazine, an incredibly popular children's magazine at the turn of the 20th century. Her writing was already helping to support her mom and sister, but most importantly, for Millay, Renaissance was her ticket out of small-town Maine and poverty.
But sure, the sky is big, I said, miles and miles above my head. So here upon my back I lie and look my fill into the sky.
Wealthy arts patron Caroline B. Dow was also at the Whitehall Inn that night of the talent show. She heard Millay and was so moved by her reading that she offered to pay for Millay's tuition at Vassar College. And from Vassar, Millay threw herself into the art scene of New York City. This was the height of the Roaring '20s. Life in the U.S. was quickly changing. The economy was booming. There was a real break with society as it had been before World War I. And New York City was at the center of a lot of that cultural change. It was the home of jazz and the Harlem Renaissance. Radios and cars blared on the streets. The androgynous and freewheeling flapper was the style of the moment. And Edna St. Vincent Millay was smack in the middle of it all.
Maybe too messy. Okay. Oh, here's this giant box of stuff. There might actually be two of them. Let's see. Okay. Let's see if Edna is in here or if it's just horrible old journals and photographs I took as a teenager. Okay. Looks like a lot of photo things. Okay, let's see if the baby will go into the crib. You want to go in here? Play with the dog?
Gillian Obsorne is a poet and educator. We caught up with her during a recent visit to her parents' place in upstate New York while she was going through old papers in the closet and rediscovering her infatuation with Edna St. Vincent Millay. Keeping her company as she's rummaging through the old papers and notebooks is her 18-month-old baby, Remy.
Let's see what we can find. So it's funny because I remember really liking Millay in high school when I read her. But what was that about? She seemed kind of snarky and bold and confident and funny. And I think at the time, actually, I was already really into poetry. I had this amazing English teacher my freshman year in school who read a bunch of poems with me. And she particularly, I think, had me memorize some sonnets, like Elizabeth Barrett Browning sonnets. And Millay wrote a lot of sonnets, amazing sonnets. So I think I was impressed with her formal capabilities. Okay, I'm not finding any books, but I am finding all of these notebooks that I used to make out of like cereal boxes. Oh my God, look at this. Okay, this one's called Poetry. This journal is only for poetry, both mine and others. Gillian Obsorne, May 15th, 1996. This one's made from a cereal box and covered with silver paper. Oh my God, this poem is called Raging Passion. I don't think I need to read that one out loud. Whew. So I think one of the things I liked about Edna St. Vincent Millay was she was actually a really sexy poet too. And people were like men and women just falling in love with her left and right. Once she got to New York, I guess.
Gillian teaches Millay to her students, and it seems like the tone of Millay still resonates with young people today. Especially young women. They're drawn to her self-control and empowerment. I mean, listen to this diss that she begins one of her poems with.
I shall forget you presently, my dear. Sonnet 4, by Edna St. Vincent Millay. I shall forget you presently, my dear. So make the most of this, your little day, your little month, your little half a year, ere I forget, or die, or move away, and we are done forever. By and by, I shall forget you, as I said. But now, if you entreat me with your loveliest lie, I will protest you with my favorite vow. I would indeed that love were longer lived, and vows were not so brittle as they are. But so it is, and nature has contrived to struggle on without a break thus far. Whether or not we find what we are seeking is idle, biologically speaking.
I mean, ouch. She starts a love poem by saying that she's a bit of a player? That kind of behavior probably didn't go over so well in Rockland, Maine in the early 20th century. a very different set of rules applied for women there than in the artsy circle of New York City.
So thinking about her in Maine, she was kind of in this like pent up moment before leaving home with a lot of power and desire. And maybe that felt like something I could relate to. I also think, maybe she was a little understimulated and bored where she was living. I think the town where I lived felt very small when I was growing there.
We're waiting outside of the Millay house, Rockland, where she was born. It's a duplex on one of Rockland's busier streets, which isn't saying much. Rockland is small and sleepy in the off-season. We're here to meet more Millay fans who have made this pretty average-looking house into a Millay house. The first one to show up is Meg Weston. She has one of those Subaru SUVs that's so common in Maine, with a rather suggestive vanity license plate.
Can I ask why your license plate is Volcano?
You can.
Will you tell me?
Sure. I've had a passion for volcanoes since I was a little girl,
Yeah.
and I've traveled all over the world and photographed volcanoes, and they appear in a lot of my writing.
Yeah.
I teach workshops in geologically active hotspots like Hawaii and Iceland.
Excellent. Yeah. Wow, I'm glad I asked.
So,
That's a much more interesting. I thought it was like something like your grandkids called you because of your.
yeah,
temper.
right.
Yeah.
I think it frightens people on the road.
It does. You don't tailgate a car with
That
a
says
volcano license
volcano.
plate, yeah.
No, you don't.
Anyway, sorry, we got
That's all
off
right.
track there.
That's all right.
So you were saying also that you came to Millay, it sounds like her poetry too, sort of late, only after you became involved in the house.
Yeah.
So what was that?
So
like?
I'm a poet, but I'm not usually drawn to rhymed verse or metrical verse. So I don't have a long history of poetry from earlier times. I'm really more drawn to contemporary poets.
Who's your favorite poet then?
Read a lot. Well, I have a lot of favorite poets.
And Meg's interest in support of contemporary poets is really why she's there. Meg got involved in the Millay house to create a writer's residence, a dead writer's house that is also a living writer's house.
So the house is a duplex,
Right.
and one side we rent to an artist
Uh-huh.
year-round.
Oh,
and
that's who lives in.
Yeah, that's who lives on the left-hand side.
Mm-hmm.
And on the right-hand side, the idea is that we will host events and things like that, but we will do juried writers in residency programs with a stipend. So we're accepting submissions right now for our first one.
The residency program might make it the first time a writer lives there. Vincent didn't do any writing in that house herself. Her parents rented it when Millay was just a newborn, and financial hardships made the move after only 6 months in Rockland. The Millays weren't the only ones living on 200 Broadway who had fallen hard times. In 2015, before the organization Millay House Rockland was founded, the building was in danger of foreclosure, condemnation, and demolition.
Maybe torn down.
And who was living here before?
A family that had, I think, 5 children, and they repaired cars in the backyard. And
It was a bit of a distress situation for them, and it was really unfortunate.
That's Michelle Gifford and Ann Morris, the president and vice president of the Millay House Rockland. Michelle grew up in the area. As a longtime realtor in town, she pretty much knows every home and everyone, and she's always been keeping an eye on the old Millay house. Seeing its poor condition was both a tragedy and an opportunity for her.
we sold. And Michelle and Terry Pinto, who lives across the street, were dying to save this landmark.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I love history, and I was anxious to help them, but we couldn't buy it.
Anne Morris was the curator of the Rockland Historical Society at the time. She had all the preservation and nonprofit experience to add to the effort of saving the Millay house, but still no money to buy it.
And Andy O'Brien, who was the editor of the Free Press here in town, he wrote the article. Really wonderful article talking about the reasons why we should keep the house, why it was important, what we were trying to accomplish. And I think Roxanne Quimby read that article and called me and drove up on right after Thanksgiving that fall. And we spent a good afternoon here and went back to my office. And she really was very wonderful as a philanthropist and said she'd like to help. And she did so.
If you know Maine, you probably know Roxanne Quimby, a founder of Burt's Bees Skincare. The help of her money allowed them to finally buy the thing. Now, 8 years, many fundraising events, renovations, and lockdowns later, Michelle, Anne, and Meg are getting the house ready to welcome the first writer in residence. They show us around the writer's digs.
How about the water pressure is good?
Writers require good water pressure. Everyone knows that.
Because they're so dirty.
I know,
Where'd you find this old typewriter, this old Royal typewriter?
Oh, Michelle. Actually, my husband spotted it, and it is like the Royal that we've seen in photographs of the typewriter she has, a steeple top. And so another board member's husband restores typewriters to our good fortune, and he restored it. It's beautiful.
What a team.
I
I
know.
was going to say, we've got a lot of people involved in this
It's a
organization.
big community project.
Yeah, it seems like it.
And I think the more time goes on, the more people are willing to step up, and they're proud of it. As I say, I think that my goal is everybody who visits Rockland will leave knowing that Edna St. Vincent Millay was born here.
So I have a question. We've been talking a lot about our house and her, but very little about her poetry. I wonder if you all could speak to what you like about the poetry.
It's incredible poetry. She was very significant as a traditional poet, American poet. I think more my interest was that she had an extraordinary life, and she came from very poor background, and she persevered and
Made it big.
And made it not only big, but she influenced specifically women of her time.
Did she influence you?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that she had a great life and came from poor beginnings.
So it's sort of like
It's
that
very
rags
inspiring.
to riches kind of story.
That's right.
But
Very
you
strong woman.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite poem or anything like that?
I
Or
don't know. I like them all.
you like them all?
Renaissance is wonderful. And
Michelle is clearly more comfortable talking about Millay's house than her poetry. That's fine. The house, the restoration of it, the funding of it, that's her thing, her passion. That's why she's on this podcast. And Gillian Obsorne is here to talk about her passion, poetry. Gillian has left the house and gone for a walk to be alone with Millay's poetry, just like she did as a teenager when she first read these works.
So the first sonnet that is in Renaissance, I think I definitely read. And I've never taught this one, but I quite love it. It starts out, "Thou art not lovelier than lilacs, no, nor honeysuckle. Thou art not more fair than small white single poppies. I can bear thy beauty."
When other modernists, and that was the style of writing that was most popular at the time Millay was working, were going wild with experimentation, Millay often wrote in the old-fashioned sonnet form and put her own very modern twist on it.
Yeah, just the negation that she begins with. When we think of all the famous sonnets that are about, Shakespeare, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely." She's saying, I'm not going to do that. Actually, you're not that great. You're not that beautiful. The lilacs are better than you. And yet she feels like the power of this lover over her. It's like this real struggle of the lover's seduction and her power. I can bear thy beauty. And then it says, "Though I bend before thee, though from left to right, not knowing where to go, I turn my troubled eyes, nor here nor there find any refuge from thee. Yet I swear so has it been with mist, with moonlight. So it's so good. And it's just this whole like waffling back and forth, like, you're not so great, I have the power, but actually I bend before you and I can't stand how attracted I am to you and how in love I am with you. So it's a wonderful poem, and she builds the tension into all these like breaks and contorted pauses in the middle. Find any refuge from the comma, yeah, I swear, line breaks. So has it been with mist, comma, dash, with moonlight. So they're just very dynamic lines. Someone was telling me, a painter friend, that if you want to create a lot of energy in a painting, you need to create lots of conflicting lines, kind of pivots in different directions. And that's what she's doing in this sonnet. So it still feels very punchy and fun, and it's addressed very firmly to a you. It's outward looking, but it's also about just the play and the dynamic quality of the words themselves.
It's this play and dynamic quality of the words, the clear voice and the tension between desire and power, that has kept Millay a favorite of Gillian's from her teenage years up until today. Edna St. Vincent Millay didn't just write sonnets. I mean, she wrote a lot of sonnets. And the love sonnets were definitely the ones that made her a literary superstar at the time. But she also wrote lyric verse, like Renaissance, an anti-war play, and even a libretto for an opera. There was one poem that kept popping up in my mind as we were walking around the Millay house in Rockland. This place where she was born, but her parents were too broke to stay. It made me think of the poem, "Childhood is the kingdom where nobody dies."
Childhood is not from birth to a certain age, and at a certain age the child is grown and puts away childish things. Childhood is the kingdom where nobody dies. Nobody that matters, that is. Distant relatives, of course, die, whom one never has seen or has seen for an hour, and they gave one candy in a pink and green striped bag or a jackknife and went away, and cannot really be said to have lived at all. And cats die. They lie on the floor and lash their tails, and their reticent fur is suddenly all in motion with fleas that one never knew were there. Polished and brown, knowing all there is to know, trekking off into the living world. You fetch a shoebox, but it's much too small, because she won't curl up now. So you find another box and bury her in the yard and weep. But you do not wake up a month from then, 2 months, a year from then, 2 years in the middle of the night and weep with your knuckles in your mouth and say, "Oh God, oh God." Childhood is the kingdom where nobody dies that matters. Mothers and fathers don't die.
Childhood is a Kingdom Where Nobody Dies was first published when Millay was in her late 30s. In a way, she didn't have much of a childhood. When her parents divorced in 1904, when Millay was 8, it was unusual and shocking. Millay, who was their oldest, had to take care of her 2 sisters when their mother, Cora, was at work. I can understand why she never really came back to small-town Maine once she had made it out as a teenager. Her life in Maine as a kid seemed more filled with adult-like responsibility than her rebellious and riotous life in New York. Her literary career was really tied to her persona as a wild and charismatic big city writer, all traces of Maine scrubbed away. And does that matter? Isn't this one of the ways a writer's life might go? You grow up in a small place, and that small place might matter to you, or it might not matter to you at all. But either way, in order to become a writer, you need to leave it behind. Leave it behind and, in Millay's case, never come back. Should that bother those of us who are left behind? It doesn't seem to bother Michelle, Anne, and Meg of the Millay house, Rockland. Even the stories of her leaving fascinates them.
Her mother died in Camden when Millay was living with her husband in Steepletop. And it was a stormy first weekend in February. She drove all the way from New York to pick up the body and drove it back to New York where she was buried. She wasn't buried here. And then apparently Edna St. Vincent Millay never really came back. So it's an interesting story there that we're not quite aware of all the details.
What about she owned an island off the coast, north, south of here, right?
Off Harpswell.
Yeah.
Right
That does seem like a final act. When you drive someone's body away from a place, it's then hard to go
Very
back.
dramatic.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder what it was in the trunk. Like, where was the body? Like, what kind of vehicle was this?
I don't know.
Was it open air?
It was one of those big, long, dark cars.
Yeah,
I think they went off the road in a snowstorm on the way home, and someone had to rescue them. But
That is dramatic.
It is a dramatic story.
Wow, it's wonderful.
And interestingly enough, too, Edna St. Vincent Millay inherited a house called the Tufts House on Chestnut. A very nice house, which when she was a child.
Here in Rockland or in Camden?
Camden,
huh?
And when she was notified in New York that she inherited the house, she immediately called a realtor and sold it.
Wow.
So that also is rather dramatic act.
Yeah.
And saying something about her relationship with Camden, we don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing.
But it is an interesting thing.
Yeah, especially the relationship between, say, New York and Maine, where so many people now in the summer from New York come here, and to this part of the coast in particular. It's kind of interesting. It's sort of reverse migration.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. With a body in the back of your car. We would all be so lucky if we could depart somewhere so dramatically like that. I would be a fan of that if my body got stuffed in the back of someone's car. Anyways, can we see the rest of that?
Okay, so Brock, we began this episode with a young poet reading her work for the first time at some historic inn in Maine.
And then we end with a dead body in the back of a car heading for New York.
Sounds like the circle of life to me, Brock.
That's right. Hakuna Matata.
What?
You know The Lion King. Everyone knows The Lion King.
Brock, we're getting off track here. We're talking about Edna St. Vincent Millay, not Walt freaking Disney. I want you to imagine what it must have been like driving away from Maine with her poor mother in the back of the car.
I love it. It's perfect.
Was it for her mother?
No, not for her mother, but for us talking about Millay. The drama, the larger-than-life life, the sense you could do something so dramatic so that you can write a new poem about it.
Yeah, a new poem in an old form.
A sonnet, that's right. A sonnet about past and future, about rebirth and death, about leaving an old place for a new one.
How does that feel? What does that feel like, being left behind in the old place?
It feels pretty good. It's not my old place. It's my new place.
I guess it's mine, too.
Besides, the houses are here in the old place.
I thought you were skeptical of the houses, Brock.
I am, totally. But not if they remind us why the poet still matters.
And does she still matter?
Sure. Would we be talking about her old house if she didn't?
You've listened to Dead Writers with me, Tess Chicalico.
And me, Brock Clark. Our managing producer and editor is Lisa Bartfai.
Cedric Wilson has created our theme music and mixed the show.
Ella Jones is our web editorial intern.
And a very special thanks to our generous sponsors, Bath Savings, and listeners like you.
You can find more information about the writers, their books, and their houses at our website on mainpublic.org. Thanks for listening.